Seoul didn't sleep, but it learned to ignore Sarah Kamara. She'd been in the city for 8 months now, long enough to understand that being a black woman in a sea of homogeneity meant becoming a beautiful ghost, seen but never quite acknowledged, present but never quite belonging. The classic American diner was a relic, a greasy time capsule tucked between a noribang and a convenience store that never closed. Its neon sign buzzed and flickered like a dying heartbeat, casting pink and blue shadows across cracked vinyl booths that smelled of decades-old cigarette smoke no amount of cleaning could erase. Sarah's hands were red and raw from the industrial soap, her lower back a constant dull ache that she'd stopped complaining about 3 months ago. Nobody cared. The owner, Mr. Park, barely looked at her when he handed over her measly paycheck, always short by a few thousand that he claimed were deductions she couldn't argue against without risking the job entirely. Her studio apartment was a 40-minute subway ride away, a shoebox with walls so thin she could hear her neighbors' entire lives, their arguments, their laughter, their intimacy. She fell asleep most nights with her father's photograph pressed against her chest, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The debt collectors had given her 2 years. 18 months remained. Her father had been a good man, a dreamer who'd invested in the wrong business partner and paid for it with his health, then his life. Sarah inherited his kindness and his debts, a cruel package deal that brought her across oceans to a country where she knew no one and understood less. Then came the man in the black suit. He appeared on a Tuesday, which Sarah only remembered because Tuesdays were when the drunk college students usually stumbled in around 3 a.m. But he arrived at 2, precise as a clock's hand, and he didn't stumble. He moved through the door like water, fluid and inevitable, his presence somehow louder than the jukebox playing crackling American oldies. He was tall, lean in the way of men who carried tension in their shoulders, and his face was the kind of beautiful that made Sarah forget to breathe. Sharp jaw, pale skin that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights, and eyes so dark they looked like they could swallow starlight. He took the corner booth, the one with the ripped vinyl she'd tried to patch with duct tape. He didn't look at the menu. When she approached with her notepad and her practiced smile, he looked up at her, and Sarah felt the world tilt slightly on its axis.
"Coffee," he said.
His Korean was formal, textbook perfect, but there was something underneath it, some heaviness that suggested he was more comfortable with silence. Black. Nothing else. Sure thing, Sarah replied in English, then caught herself and switched to her clumsy Korean. Of course. Right away. His eyes flickered with something surprise, amusement, and the corner of his mouth lifted almost imperceptibly. Your English is better, he said, switching languages effortlessly. Use that. I don't mind. She brought him coffee in a chipped mug, and he wrapped his long fingers around it like he was trying to steal its warmth. He didn't drink it right away. He watched her instead, not in the way the drunk salary men watched her, with eyes that crawled and grasped. He watched her like she was a painting he was trying to memorize, something precious that might disappear if he looked away. When he left an hour later, he placed a 50,001 note on the table for coffee that cost 3,000. Sarah ran after him into the street, but he was already gone, dissolved into the Seoul night like he'd never existed at all. Only the money remained, real and impossible in her trembling hand. He came back the next night, and the night after that. Always at 2 a.m. Always the corner booth. Always just coffee and that quiet, consuming gaze that made Sarah feel like she was finally, mercifully. 3 weeks became a routine, and routine became something dangerously close to need. Sarah found herself watching the clock, her heart performing a stupid little flutter around 1:55, anticipation curling in her stomach like smoke. She started keeping the corner booth empty even when the diner was busy, ignoring Mr. Park's irritated glances. She learned to brew the coffee exactly 4 minutes before 2 a.m., so it would be perfect when he arrived, hot but not scalding, strong enough to taste like a promise. Jun Ho. That was his name, though it took 2 weeks before he offered it. He said it simply, like he was handing her a business card, his eyes never leaving her face. You can call me Jun Ho if you'd like.
I prefer it, actually.
The pause before prefer felt weighted, like he was confessing something. Sarah, she'd replied, though he already knew. He'd been saying her name every night when he thanked her for the coffee. Thank you, Sarah SSI, with a softness that made the honorific sound like an endearment. They talked in fragments at first, careful conversations during the slow hours when the diner emptied out and left them in a bubble of neon light and crackling oldies. He asked about her life with the gentle precision of someone who already knew the answers, but wanted to hear her voice anyway. She told him about her father, about the dreams that had turned to debts, about how Seoul felt like living underwater, beautiful and suffocating all at once. He sounds like he was brave, Jun Ho said one night, his finger tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Coming to a foreign country, trying to build something. That takes courage. Or stupidity, Sarah laughed, but it came out hollow. He trusted the wrong person. Got involved in some investment scheme that tanked. The partner vanished, left him holding the bag. He worked himself to death trying to make it right. Jun Ho's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The partner. Did they ever find him?
No.
Why would they? My father was nobody. Just another immigrant who made bad choices. You're paying his debts. It wasn't a question. Sarah shrugged, suddenly self-conscious under the weight of his attention. He was my dad. What else was I supposed to do? Something shifted in Jun Ho's expression then, something that looked almost like pain. He reached across the table, and for a heart-stopping moment Sarah thought he might take her hand, but he simply straightened the napkin dispenser that didn't need straightening. Family debts, he said quietly, are the hardest ones to carry. They never feel like they're truly yours, but you carry them anyway because love doesn't come with terms and conditions. Sounds like you know something about that, Sarah ventured. His smile was brief and didn't reach his eyes. My family has very specific expectations. I've been managing the business since my father's health declined. It's demanding work, long hours, difficult people. Is that why you're always here so late? Escaping the office? Something like that. He took a sip of his coffee, and Sarah noticed, not for the first time, how his hands were elegant but scarred, small white lines across his knuckles, a curved mark on his right thumb that looked almost like a burn. This place is quiet. Peaceful. You're here. He said it like all three things were equally important, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. I'm not exactly glamorous company, she said, trying to laugh it off. I smell like fryer grease and broken dreams. You smell like vanilla and coffee, Jun Ho corrected, his voice dropping lower. And you're the only real thing I've encountered in years. The air between them felt charged, electric. Sarah was suddenly aware of how close they were across the small table, how his eyes had darkened to something almost hungry. The bell above the door jangled, breaking the moment, and Jun Ho leaned back smoothly as a group of drunk businessmen stumbled in. When he left that night, there was an envelope tucked under his coffee cup. Sarah found it after he'd gone, crisp bills adding up to more than she made in 2 months. Her hands shook as she counted it. When she looked up, Jun Ho was standing outside the window, watching her through the glass. Their eyes met, and he shook his head slowly.
Keep it, the gesture said.
Then he turned and disappeared into a sleek black car that Sarah suddenly realized had been waiting for him every single night, idling in the shadows just beyond the neon's reach. Sarah tried to return the money for 3 days straight. She kept the envelope in her apron pocket, the weight of it a constant reminder that felt less like kindness and more like a change she didn't understand. But Jun Ho was a ghost during those 72 hours. The corner booth remained empty at 2 a.m., the coffee she brewed going cold and wasted, and Sarah found herself staring at the door with an ache in her chest that felt disproportionate to knowing someone for less than a month. When he finally returned, it was raining, one of those sudden Seoul downpours that turned the streets into rivers and made the neon signs blur into watercolor smears. He was soaked despite his obviously expensive coat, his black hair plastered to his forehead, and there was something different about him.
Tension, maybe.
Or anger. It radiated off him in waves that made Sarah's server instincts scream danger, but she approached anyway, the envelope already in her hand. You can't just, she started, but he cut her off with a look so sharp it could draw blood.
Sit.
It wasn't a request. Sarah sat, sliding into the booth across from him without thinking. Up close, she could see he was furious about something, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. There was a bruise forming along his cheekbone, dark purple against pale skin. "You're hurt," she said stupidly. "It's nothing." He took the envelope from her hand, his fingers brushing hers in a way that sent electricity racing up her arm. "You are going to try to give this back. I can't accept this much money from you. I don't even know you." "You know me better than most people," Jun Ho said, and there was something raw in his voice. "You know I take my coffee black. You know I prefer silence. You know I come here every night because this is the only place where I can breathe without feeling like I'm drowning in blood." He stopped abruptly, his expression shuddering. "You know enough. Jun Ho, I'm not a charity case. This isn't charity." His hand moved across the table, covering hers before she could pull away. His palm was warm despite the rain, his touch gentle despite the barely leashed violence she could feel humming beneath his skin. "Consider it a down payment." "On what?" "Your time. Your attention. He paused, seeming to struggle with the word. "Your presence. I want to keep coming here. I want you to keep making coffee at 2 a.m. I want you to keep looking at me like I'm just a man instead of—" Again, that abrupt stop, like he'd caught himself before confessing something unforgivable. "Instead of what?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jun Ho's thumb traced a small circle on the back of her hand, a gesture so intimate it made her dizzy. "Instead of what everyone else sees. Just let me have this, Sarah. Let me have these nights. Let me pretend that I'm someone who deserves to sit across from you." There was desperation there, buried under layers of control and expensive cologne. Sarah thought about her father's debts, about the 18 months still hanging over her head like a guillotine. She thought about how Jun Ho looked at her like she was something precious, how he was the only person in Seoul who spoke to her like she mattered. She thought about the bruise on his face, and the scars on his hands, and the way danger seemed to follow him like a shadow. She should say no. She should push the money back across the table and tell him to find another diner, another waitress, another place to pretend to be human. Instead, she turned her hand over, letting their palms meet properly, and said, "Okay. But next time you disappear for 3 days, you text me. I have a phone. Use it." Something like relief flooded his expression, followed quickly by surprise. "You're not going to ask questions? Would you answer them honestly?" "No," he admitted. "Then why waste our time?" Sarah stood, pulling her hand away before she could do something stupid like hold on tighter. "I'll get your coffee. Same as always." As she walked away, she felt his eyes on her like a physical weight. When she brought the coffee back, there was a business card on the table, heavy black stock with silver lettering. No company name, just a phone number and a symbol that looked like a snake coiled around the letter S. She picked it up, and Jun Ho's hand shot out, covering the card. "Just the number," he said quietly. "Ignore the rest. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, Sarah, you call. It doesn't matter when. It doesn't matter why. You call, and I'll come." She should have asked what the symbol meant. She should have wondered why a businessman needed to promise protection to a waitress. She should have recognized the warning signs that were probably written in neon, as bright as the sign outside. But Sarah Kamara had been invisible for so long that being seen felt like oxygen, and she was too busy trying to breathe to notice she was drowning. It happened on a Friday night, which meant the diner was busier than usual, post-club crowds stumbling in for greasy food and black coffee, trying to sober up before going home to their respectable lives. Sarah was running between tables, her feet aching and her patience worn thin, when the group of men entered. 5 of them, loud and drunk, wearing expensive clothes that they'd already started to ruin with spilled soju and cigarette ash. They took the booth next to Jun Ho's corner spot, and Sarah's stomach tightened with instinctive unease. Jun Ho had been there for an hour already, unusually quiet tonight, his untouched coffee growing cold as he stared at something on his phone with an expression that looked carved from ice. The drunk men were too loud, too aggressive, their laughter serrated and mean. Sarah approached with menus and her professional smile. The one that hid everything real. Welcome. What can I get? Yeah, look at this. One of them interrupted in Korean, his eyes traveling over Sarah in a way that made her skin crawl. They import the waitresses now. Hey, chocolate girl, you speak Korean? I can take your order, Sarah replied evenly, keeping her voice neutral. Years of service work had taught her how to smile through disrespect. I bet you can take a lot of things. Another one laughed, and his hand shot out, grabbing Sarah's wrist. Why don't you sit with us? We'll tip better than whatever pathetic salary they pay you here. Sarah tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, and she could smell the soju on his breath, see the ugly intention in his eyes. Sir, please let go. Make me sweetheart. Or better yet. The temperature in the diner dropped 20 degrees. Sarah felt it before she saw it. The way the air itself seemed to crystallize, the way silence fell like a guillotine blade. The man's hand was still on her wrist, but he'd frozen mid-sentence, his face draining of color as he stared at something over her shoulder. His friends had gone similarly still, their drunkenness evaporating into stone-cold sobriety. Remove your hand. Jun Ho's voice came from directly behind Sarah, so quiet it was barely audible, but it carried the weight of a death sentence.
Now.
The man released Sarah like she'd burned him. She stumbled back, and Jun Ho's hand steadied her elbow, gentle with her, even as everything about him radiated lethal intent. She turned to look at him and barely recognized what she saw. This wasn't the soft-spoken man who drank black coffee and spoke in careful confessions. This was something else entirely. Jun Ho stood with the relaxed posture of a predator, his dark eyes flat and merciless, and there was a smile on his face that had nothing to do with happiness. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how many ways he could hurt you and was considering which would be most efficient. Do you know who I am? He asked the group, still in that terrible quiet voice. The men were shaking. Actually shaking. One of them had tears running down his face. We didn't know she was yours, Sajangnam, we swear. Sajangnam? Sarah whispered.
Boss.
They'd called him boss. Jun Ho didn't look at her. His attention remained fixed on the men with the intensity of a sniper's scope. You have 10 seconds to leave this establishment. If I ever see any of you again, I'll assume you're volunteering for the Han River. Am I understood?
They ran.
Grown men, scrambling over each other to escape, leaving behind wallets and phones in their panic. The door chimed violently as they burst into the street, and then there was silence, broken only by the jukebox, still playing Patsy Cline like nothing apocalyptic had just occurred. Sarah stared at Jun Ho, her heart hammering against her ribs. He still wasn't looking at her. His hand had fallen away from her elbow, and he stood rigidly, like he was trying to physically contain whatever darkness he'd just unleashed. Jun Ho, she said carefully. What just happened? Finally, he turned to face her, and Sarah saw the moment he forced the mask back on, saw him push down the monster and pull up the man. But she'd seen underneath now. She'd seen what he really was. I apologize, he said, his voice returning to its normal careful cadence. That was inappropriate. I shouldn't have interfered. They were terrified of you. Yes. They called you Sajangnam. They knew who you were. Yes. What kind of business did you say you were in? Jun Ho's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, with the air of someone confessing to murder, he said, the family business. Territory management. Problem solving. Each word was chosen precisely, and each word was a lie wrapped around a truth. I should go. I've caused enough trouble for one night. He moved toward the door, and Sarah's hand shot out, catching his sleeve. Wait. Just wait. I'm not. She didn't know how to finish that sentence. Not scared? That was a lie. Not going to ask questions? Another lie. Don't go. Please. Jun Ho looked down at where her fingers clutched his expensive jacket, then up at her face. Something in his expression cracked, showing the desperation underneath. You should be running from me, Sarah. You should be calling the police. You should be doing anything except asking me to stay. But I am asking. Why? Because you're the only person who sees me. Because you make me feel less alone. Because even now, with whatever you are obvious between us, I don't want you to leave. Because you haven't finished your coffee, she said instead. And I don't let customers waste coffee. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that might have been pain. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Maybe both. Sarah released his sleeve, but she didn't step back.
Sit.
Drink your coffee. We'll pretend the last 5 minutes didn't happen, and tomorrow you can decide if you want to keep coming here or not. Jun Ho studied her face like he was memorizing it, then slowly, carefully, he returned to his corner booth. Sarah brought him fresh coffee, and they sat in loaded silence while Patsy Cline sang about falling to pieces. Neither of them mentioned how Sarah's hands shook as she set down the cup. Neither of them mentioned that Jun Ho's bruised knuckles were now white from gripping the edge of the table. And neither of them mentioned that they both knew everything had just irrevocably changed, and there was no going back to the comfortable fiction they'd been living. The monster was out of the box. The only question now was whether Sarah would run from it or toward it. Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her shoebox apartment, staring at the water-stained ceiling while her neighbors argued in muffled Korean through the thin walls, and she thought about the way those men had looked at Jun Ho. Not with the fear you'd give a violent drunk or an aggressive boss. With the terror reserved for something far worse. Sajangnam. Territory management.
Problem solving.
Her phone sat on the floor beside her futon, the black business card resting against it. She'd been staring at that snake symbol for hours now, the silver print catching the streetlight filtering through her curtain. It looked familiar in a way that made her stomach churn, like a word on the tip of her tongue or a nightmare half-remembered. At 4 a.m., she gave up on sleep and opened her laptop. The diner's Wi-Fi password had finally worked in her apartment, one small victory in a series of defeats, and she typed carefully into the search bar, Snake S, symbol Seoul. The results loaded slowly, each one making her heart sink further. Gun Family Syndicate. The largest organized crime operation in Seoul, with territories spanning from Gangnam to Itaewon. Suspected involvement in everything from protection rackets to international smuggling. The current head was Gun Jae-sung, though his health had been declining. His son and heir. Sarah clicked on the image results, and her world tilted sideways. Gun Jun Ho, 28 years old. Educated in London and Tokyo. Returned to Seoul 5 years ago to take over day-to-day operations of the family business. Known as the Cold Prince in the criminal underworld for his reputation of calculated violence and complete emotional detachment. Suspected of at least 15 murders, though nothing had ever been proven. The article showed him in a crisp suit, leaving a courthouse where another case had collapsed due to lack of evidence and witness intimidation. His face was expressionless in the photo, but Sarah recognized the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. Her sweet customer. Her 2 a.m. regular. The man who listened to her talk about her father with gentle eyes. The man who'd looked at those drunk men like he was deciding which bones to break first. Sarah slammed the laptop closed and pressed her palms against her eyes. Stupid. She'd been so incredibly stupid. All the signs had been there. The expensive clothes, the black car always waiting, the scars on his knuckles, the way he moved like violence was a language he spoke fluently. She'd ignored it all because she was lonely, and he made her feel seen, and she'd wanted so desperately to believe in something good. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Can't sleep either? Sarah's hands shook as she typed back. How did you get my number? The employment records Mr. Park keeps in his office are embarrassingly easy to access. Are you afraid of me now? She should lie. She should say yes and block his number and quit the diner and maybe leave Seoul entirely. Instead, she wrote, I don't know what I am. 3 disappeared, appeared again. Finally, that's fair. For what it's worth, I've been terrified of you since the first night I walked into that diner. That doesn't make sense. I'm nobody. You're everything. The message came through immediately, like he'd been waiting to say it. You're the first person in years who looked at me and saw something worth saving. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? How addictive? Sarah's throat tightened. She typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on. What do you want from me? Nothing you're not willing to give. But I need you to understand something, Sarah. I'm not a good man. I've done things that would make you sick. I'll do worse things in the future because it's who I am and what my family requires. But when I'm sitting in that diner at 2 a.m., watching you make coffee and tell me about your day, I get to pretend, just for an hour, that I'm someone different. You can't pretend away being a crime lord.
No.
But I can pretend you don't know. I can pretend I'm just Jun Ho, the weird businessman who tips too much. I can pretend that maybe, somehow, I deserve to be in the same room as someone as good as you. A pause, then another message. I'll understand if you don't want me to come back. I'll stay away. But I need you to know that these past few weeks have been the only time I've felt human in 5 years. Sarah stared at her phone screen until the words blurred. She thought about her father, who'd trusted the wrong person and paid with everything. She thought about the debts hanging over her head and the invisible life she'd been living. She thought about how Jun Ho had defended her without hesitation, how his hand on her elbow had been gentle even when everything else about him was lethal. She was 24 years old, alone in a foreign country, drowning in inherited debts and working herself to death for people who barely remembered her name. Jun Ho was a monster, yes. But he was a monster who saw her. Really saw her. And wasn't that worth something? Wasn't that worth the risk? Her phone buzzed again. I'm sorry. Forget I said anything. I'll stay away. Be safe, Sarah SSI. Her fingers moved before her brain caught up. Same booth. 2 a.m. Don't be late. The response came within seconds. I'm always on time for you. Sarah set her phone down and stared at the ceiling again, but this time, she wasn't thinking about terror. She was thinking about the way Jun Ho had smiled at her. Really smiled. Not that terrifying predator's grin he'd given those men, but the soft, almost shy expression he wore when she remembered how he took his coffee. She was thinking about how his voice had sounded when he called her everything. She was thinking about how she'd already decided, somewhere in the knot of fear and want in her chest, that she wasn't going to run. Maybe she was brave. Maybe she was foolish. Maybe she was just tired of being invisible and Jun Ho was the first person who'd made her feel real. The snake and the S on that business card glinted in the streetlight. Sarah picked it up, traced the silver symbol with her finger, and made her choice. Tomorrow night, she'd brew his coffee at 1:56. She'd meet his eyes across the table. And she'd stop pretending she didn't know exactly what he was and how dangerous this had become. The question wasn't whether she'd accept the monster. The question was whether she was ready for what came after. The diner felt different that night. Sarah couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed. The neon still buzzed and flickered. The jukebox still played the same rotation of American oldies. Mr. Park still glared at her from behind the register before leaving her alone for the graveyard shift. But something in the air felt charged, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Jun Ho arrived at exactly 2 a.m., and Sarah's breath caught the way it always did now. He looked tired. She noticed shadows under his eyes that even his carefully constructed composure couldn't hide. He was wearing all black tonight, which somehow made him look even more dangerous, and when he slid into the corner booth, she saw the holster under his jacket. A gun. He was carrying a gun. Bad night? She asked, setting down his coffee without being asked. It's about to get worse. His eyes met hers, and there was an urgency there that made her pulse quicken. Sarah, I need you to do something for me. When I tell you to get behind the counter, you do it immediately. Don't ask questions. Don't hesitate. Just go. Jun Ho, what? The door burst open, and 5 men entered. Not customers. Sarah knew that instantly from the way they moved, coordinated, purposeful, predatory. They wore dark clothes and hard expressions, and the lead man had a scar running from his temple to his jaw that looked like it had been earned violently. Gun Jun Ho, the scarred man said in Korean, his voice carrying across the empty diner. The Cold Prince himself. Hiding in a shithole diner, like a rat. How the mighty have fallen. Jun Ho didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, could feel the violence coiling beneath his skin like a spring being compressed. Kim Sang-woo. I thought I smelled something rotten. What do you want? Your territory. Your operations. Your head on a pike. Sang-woo smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd already decided someone was going to die tonight. The old families are tired of the gun dynasty. Your father is weak. You're distracted. His eyes slid to Sarah, and her blood turned to ice. Playing house with imported trash. Pathetic. Sarah. Jun Ho's voice was calm, almost gentle. Behind the counter.
Now.
She didn't argue. She moved quickly, her server instincts kicking in even as her mind screamed danger. Behind the counter, she crouched low, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Through the gap between the counter and the register, she could see Jun Ho stand, fluid, economical, every movement precise. You made a mistake coming here, Jun Ho said, and his voice had changed. No more careful formality. This was the voice of the monster she'd seen glimpses of, raw and cold and absolutely certain. This place is off limits. She is off limits. Is that right? Sang-woo laughed. And what are you going to do about it, Prince? You're outnumbered. Your men are dealing with our distraction across town. You're alone. Jun Ho's smile was terrifying. I'm never alone. It happened faster than Sarah could process. Jun Ho moved like liquid violence, one moment standing still, the next moment a blur of motion. The first man went down with a crushed throat, choking on his own blood. The second took Jun Ho's elbow to his temple and crumpled like paper. The gun appeared in Jun Ho's hand without her seeing him draw it, and the third man's knee exploded in a spray of red and bone. Sang-woo pulled his own weapon, but Jun Ho was already there, his hand clamping around the man's wrist with enough force to make bones grind. The gun clattered to the floor, and Jun Ho kicked it away with casual efficiency. Then he leaned in close, speaking in Korean too quick and quiet for Sarah to catch, and whatever he said made Sang-woo's face drain of color. The remaining conscious man tried to run. Jun Ho let him take 3 steps before shooting him in the leg. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and Sarah clapped her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. When she opened them again, Jun Ho was standing in the center of the diner, surrounded by bleeding men, his suit somehow still immaculate except for a splash of blood across his collar. He looked at her through the gap in the counter, and his expression was unreadable. Are you hurt? Sarah shook her head, not trusting her voice. Good. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then addressed the groaning men on the floor in that terrible cold voice. You're going to deliver a message to the Kim family. Tell them the gun territory is not negotiable. Tell them anyone who comes near this diner, near this woman, will be found in pieces in the Han River. Tell them the Cold Prince is not distracted. He's protective. And that makes him significantly more dangerous. Black SUVs pulled up outside, Jun Ho's men, finally arriving. They entered the diner with the efficiency of people who'd cleaned up messes like this before, and within minutes the wounded men were gone. The blood was being mopped up, and the diner looked almost normal again except for a few bullet holes and Sarah's shattered sense of reality. Jun Ho approached the counter slowly, like she was a wild animal he didn't want to spook. Sarah. You killed someone. Her voice came out hoarse. Right in front of me. You just. Yes. No apology. No justification. Just acknowledgement. This is what you do. This is your life. Yes. Sarah pulled herself to her feet, her legs shaking. They stared at each other across the counter, her in her grease-stained uniform, him in his blood-splattered suit, and the distance between them felt insurmountable and paper-thin all at once. You should have let me stay invisible, she whispered. You should have left me alone. Jun Ho's composure finally cracked, and she saw raw anguish flash across his face. I know. God, I know. But I couldn't. From the moment I walked through that door, and you smiled at me like I was just another customer, like I was human, I was lost. I tried to stay away. I tried to protect you by keeping distance. But I'm selfish, Sarah. I'm selfish and I'm damned, and I wanted to keep that feeling of being seen by you. They came here because of me, because you come here. They came here because they're stupid and now they're dead or wish they were. He ran a hand through his hair, and she noticed his hands were shaking slightly. I'll have men watching this place 24/7. No one will touch you. No one will even look at you wrong. You have my word. Your word. Sarah laughed, and it came out slightly hysterical. The word of a killer. Of a crime lord. What's that worth? Everything. He said it with such intensity that it stole her breath. It's worth everything, because you're everything. I will burn this entire city down before I let anyone hurt you. The jukebox started playing again. Patsy Cline, Crazy, and the absurdity of it made Sarah want to laugh and cry and scream. Instead, she did something that surprised them both. She walked around the counter, crossed the distance between them, and looked up into his dark, dangerous, desperate eyes. If you look at me like that again, Jun Ho. Like what? His voice was barely a whisper. Like you're drowning and I'm air. Like I'm something worth killing for. Like you're trying to memorize my face in case you never see me again. Her hand came up, almost of its own accord, and touched the blood on his collar. If you look at me like that again, I'm going to stop pretending I don't feel the same way. The air between them crystallized into something sharp and electric. Jun Ho's hand lifted, hovering near her face, but not quite touching, like he was afraid he'd stain her with the violence still on his skin. You should run, he breathed. I know. You should hate me. I probably will. Eventually. Sarah. Kiss me or leave, Jun Ho. But stop pretending you're going to let me go. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. Instead, Jun Ho's hand finally made contact, cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd just witnessed, his thumb tracing her cheekbone like she was made of glass. His eyes searched hers with an intensity that felt like being seen down to her bones, past her fear, past her common sense, straight to the truth she'd been avoiding. If I kiss you, he said quietly, there's no going back. You'll be mine and I'll be yours, and that means you're part of this world, whether you want to be or not. It means every enemy I have will know you're my weakness. It means I'll do unspeakable things to keep you safe. It means, his voice cracked slightly, it means I'll ruin your life just to keep you in mine. Sarah's heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. The diner smelled like coffee and gun smoke and the copper tang of blood, and Jun Ho was looking at her like she was salvation and damnation wrapped in a grease-stained uniform. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But underneath the fear was something else. Want. Need. The desperate ache of someone who'd been invisible for so long finally being seen. You already ruined my life the moment you walked through that door, she said, and she was surprised to find she meant it. You made me feel something other than tired and alone. You made me believe I was worth someone's time. You made me want something more than just surviving. Her hand came up, covering his where it rested against her face. So, if we're talking about ruining lives, Jun Ho, you started this. You don't get to stop now because it's gotten complicated. Complicated. He laughed, sharp and pained. Sarah, I killed a man 10 feet from where you're standing. My hands are covered in blood. I'm the monster parents warn their children about. There's nothing complicated about it. I'm damned, and you deserve better. Maybe I don't want better. Maybe I just want you. Something in him broke at those words. She saw it happen, saw the last of his control shatter like glass. His forehead dropped to hers, and they stood there breathing the same air, suspended in a moment that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff deciding whether to jump. If you look at me like that again, Jun Ho whispered, echoing her earlier words, like I'm something worth saving instead of something that should be put down, Sarah, I'm going to stop pretending I'm a good man. I'm going to keep you. I'm going to be selfish and possessive, and I'm going to make you part of my world in ways that will change you forever. I'm going to show you exactly why they call me a monster. And I'm not going to feel guilty about it because you'll be mine and I'll be yours and nothing else will matter. Then stop pretending, Sarah breathed. Show me.
Keep me.
Be selfish. I'm so tired of being alone, Jun Ho. I'm so tired of being invisible. If being yours means being seen, then I'll take the monster along with the man. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was air, like she was the last good thing in a world gone rotten, like he'd been waiting his entire life for permission to want something this much. His hand tangled in her hair while the other wrapped around her waist, pulling her flesh against him, and Sarah gasped against his mouth at the intensity of it. This wasn't a gentle first kiss. This was a claiming, a promise, a point of no return. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jun Ho rested his forehead against hers again. "I need you to understand what you just agreed to," he said, his voice rough. "I need you to really understand. Starting tonight, you're under my protection. That means you don't go anywhere without security. It means you quit this diner. I'll pay off every one of your father's debt, and you'll never have to serve another cup of coffee to another drunk asshole. It means you move out of that shoebox apartment and into a place where I know you're safe. It means I lose every piece of independence I fought for." Sarah pulled back slightly, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm not some prize you won, Jun Ho. I'm not some doll you can put in a gilded cage. I know that."
Do you?
"Because it sounds like you're trying to take over my entire life." His jaw clenched. "Your entire life is in danger because of me. Because I was selfish enough to keep coming here, to keep wanting you, to make you visible to people who will use you to hurt me. So yes, I'm taking over. Because the alternative is you dead in a gutter somewhere while I attend your funeral and pretend I'm still human enough to feel grief. Then teach me." The words came out before she'd fully thought them through, but once they were out there, Sarah realized she meant them. "If your world is this dangerous, then teach me how to survive in it.
Don't hide me away.
Don't make me useless. If I'm going to be yours, then let me be your partner, not your possession." Jun Ho stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You want me to teach you, Sarah? This isn't a game. This isn't some romantic drama.
People die.
Violently. Frequently. Then teach me how to make sure I'm not one of them." She grabbed the front of his shirt, standing on her toes to get closer to his face. "I'm not some fragile thing that's going to shatter. I survived losing my father. I survived coming to a foreign country alone. I survived working myself half to death to pay debts that weren't mine. I'm stronger than you think. So don't you dare try to put me in a cage, even a golden one. If I'm choosing you, if I'm choosing this, then I'm choosing all of it.
Teach me. Trust me.
Let me stand beside you instead of behind you." For a long moment, Jun Ho didn't respond. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, not the terrifying predator's grin, not the soft, gentle expression he wore for her, but something new. Something that looked like respect, mixed with wonder, mixed with the kind of possessive pride that should have been a warning sign but instead made Sarah's heart race faster. "You're going to be magnificent," he said quietly. "Absolutely terrifying and completely magnificent." He kissed her again, softer this time but no less intense.
"Fine.
I'll teach you. But if you get hurt because I was too lenient, because I let you take risks that I should have prevented, then you'll have to live with it, just like I'll have to live with watching you walk into danger every day." Sarah's hand came up, cupping his face the way he'd cupped hers. "This goes both ways, Jun Ho. You don't get to be the only one who's terrified. You don't get to be the only one who's protective. If I'm yours, then you're mine too. That means I get a say. That means we figure this out together." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man starved for gentleness. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be someone's partner. I only know how to be a weapon. Then we'll learn together. Starting with you teaching me how to shoot that gun you're carrying." His eyes snapped open. "Absolutely not. You just agreed. I agreed to teach you how to survive. Teaching you how to shoot means putting a weapon in your hands that you might use to defend yourself, which means you'd be in a situation where you need to defend yourself, which means I've failed to protect you.
So no.
No guns." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "So, I'm supposed to what? Throw coffee at attackers? You're supposed to run while my men handle it. You're supposed to call me immediately. You're supposed to—" He stopped, seeing the expression on her face. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "Not even slightly." Jun Ho sighed, but there was something almost fond in it.
Fine.
I'll teach you to shoot. And basic self-defense. And how to identify exits and threats. And this is non-negotiable, Sarah. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. My job is to keep you alive. Your job is to let me. Agreed. Agreed, Sarah said, even though they both knew she was probably lying. They stood there in the empty diner, the jukebox now playing something slow and sad, surrounded by the evidence of violence and the promise of more to come. Jun Ho's arms were around her waist, her hands were on his chest feeling his heartbeat, and everything about this was insane and dangerous and completely inevitable. I should take you home, Jun Ho said finally. Your real home. Not that apartment. Somewhere safe. The diner doesn't close until 6. The diner is closed as of right now. I'm buying the building. Mr. Park will get more money than this place is worth, and you're done serving coffee to anyone but me. Sarah should have protested. Should have argued about him throwing money at problems, about him making decisions for her, about him literally buying the place she worked just to keep her safe. But she was exhausted, and he was warm, and she'd already decided to jump off the cliff. Might as well enjoy the fall. Take me home then, she said. Show me this gilded cage you're planning. It's a penthouse in Gangnam. Floor-to-ceiling windows. 3 bedrooms. Full security system. Your own space if you want it. If I want it? His arms tightened around her, and his voice dropped to something possessive and dark. I'd prefer if you didn't. I'd prefer if you stayed in my bed, where I can make absolutely certain you're safe. But I'm trying to give you choices, Sarah. I'm trying to be less of a monster than I actually am. She pulled back enough to look up at him. This beautiful, dangerous man who'd killed people in front of her and then held her like she was precious. I don't want a monster or a man, Jun Ho. I want you. All of you. The cold prince and the lonely customer and everything in between. Then that's what you'll get, he promised. For better or worse. Until death do us part or someone successfully puts a bullet in my head. Don't joke about that. Who's joking? But he smiled when he said it, and Sarah decided that maybe falling off cliffs wasn't so bad when someone was falling with you. The penthouse was exactly what Jun Ho had described, but Sarah hadn't been prepared for the reality of it. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline, modern furniture that probably cost more than her entire year's salary, and a silence so complete it felt heavy. After the constant noise of her apartment, the neighbors, the traffic, the city's endless hum, the quiet here was disorienting. Jun Ho watched her take it in, still wearing his blood-stained shirt, his expression unreadable. 2 of his men had driven them here in a black SUV, silent and efficient, and now stood guard outside the door. Inside, they were alone for the first time since the violence, and the weight of what had happened was finally settling on Sarah's shoulders. There's clothes in the second bedroom, Jun Ho said quietly. Probably not your style, but they'll fit. Showers through there. I need to make some calls, handle tonight's aftermath. Then we should talk. Really talk. Sarah nodded, suddenly too exhausted to speak. She found the bedroom, pristine white linens, a closet full of women's clothes with tags still attached in exactly her size. The realization that he'd prepared this, that he'd been planning for her to be here eventually, should have been creepy. Instead, it just felt inevitable. The shower was scalding hot and endless, and Sarah stood under the spray until her skin turned pink and the last of the adrenaline finally drained away. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel that was probably worth more than her security deposit, she found simple clothes laid out on the bed, soft joggers, and an oversized shirt that smelled like Jun Ho's cologne. She put them on and padded barefoot back to the living room. Jun Ho had changed too, now wearing simple black pants and a t-shirt that made him look younger, more vulnerable. He'd made coffee, actual good coffee in an expensive machine, and he handed her a mug without speaking. They sat on the couch, a careful distance between them, and looked out at Seoul glittering beneath them like scattered stars. I need to tell you something, Jun Ho said finally. About why I kept coming to the diner. About what you really are to me. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Okay. I've been running the family business for 5 years. Since I was 23, and my father had his first stroke. 5 years of territory wars and negotiations and cleaning up messes and making hard decisions that no one should have to make at that age. Or any age. He paused, staring into his coffee like it held answers. I'm good at it. That's the worst part. I'm very, very good at being a monster. It comes naturally. The coldness, the violence, the ability to make decisions that keep the syndicate strong even when they cost lives. My father always said I was his perfect weapon. Jun Ho. Let me finish. His voice was tight. Please. Because if I stop, I might not be able to start again. He took a shaky breath. 6 months ago, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I felt anything. Not happiness, not sadness, not fear. Just nothing. I was going through the motions, doing what needed to be done, and I was empty. Completely empty. I started wondering what the point was. If this was all there was, violence and power and more violence, then why keep going? Sarah's chest tightened at the pain in his voice. I was driving one night.
Late.
I'd just come from a meeting that ended with me putting a bullet in someone's head because he'd betrayed the family. And I saw your diner. That stupid neon sign. Pink and blue, looking like something out of an old American movie. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I was looking for a reason to feel something other than empty. He turned to look at her then, and his eyes were raw. Then you walked over with your notepad and your smile, and you looked at me like I was just a customer. Not the Cold Prince. Not Gun Jae-sung's heir. Just a man who wanted coffee. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt something. Interest. Curiosity.
Want. You were so real, Sarah.
So genuine. No fear, no calculation, no hidden agenda. Just kindness because that's who you are. I didn't know who you were, Sarah said softly. I know. That's what made it perfect. You saw me, really saw me, and you saw someone worth talking to. Someone worth smiling at. Someone worth worrying about when I showed up with bruises. I became addicted to that feeling. To feeling human. To feeling seen. His hand moved across the couch, finding hers. I told myself I'd just come a few times. That I'd satisfy my curiosity and move on. But then you told me about your father, and I saw myself in you. This woman carrying debts that weren't hers, working herself to death for someone else's mistakes, still somehow managing to be kind and bright and genuine. You were everything I'd sacrificed to become what I am. Sarah's throat was tight. What are you saying? I'm saying I've been protecting you for months. Since the second night, I came to the diner. I have men watching your apartment, your commute, the diner. I paid off 3 of your father's debtors without telling you. I made sure Mr. Park couldn't cheat you out of wages. I've been managing your life from the shadows because the thought of something happening to you, of you disappearing from that diner, of losing the one good thing in my life. His voice cracked. It was unbearable. You paid off my debts. Sarah whispered.
Some of them.
Not all. I knew you'd notice if they all suddenly disappeared. I was trying to be subtle, trying to help without taking away your autonomy. But then tonight happened, and subtle went out the window, and now you know everything and I can't. He stopped, his hand tightening around hers. I can't lose you. I know that makes me selfish. I know I'm dragging you into darkness. But I need you, Sarah. Not like I need weapons or soldiers or territory. I need you like I need air. You're the only thing that makes me feel human. Sarah set down her coffee with a shaking hand. I don't know how to process this. Any of this. You've been watching me for months? Managing my life?
Yes.
And I do it again. I do worse than that to keep you safe. That's not normal, Jun Ho. That's not healthy. I'm not normal. I'm not healthy. I'm a monster playing at being a man, and you're the only thing that makes the act convincing. He turned fully toward her, and the expression on his face was something between desperation and devotion. I know I should let you go. I know I should put you on a plane back to Sierra Leone with enough money to live comfortably forever. But I can't. I'm too selfish, too broken, too addicted to the way you look at me. So I'm asking you, begging you to stay. To let me keep you. To let me worship you and protect you and give you everything you could possibly want in exchange for just being here. For being real. For being you. The city lights blurred as tears filled Sarah's eyes. This was insane. This was every red flag wrapped up in expensive clothes and a beautiful face. This was dangerous and codependent and absolutely not what any sane person would choose. But Sarah had stopped being sane the moment she'd asked him to kiss her in a diner that smelled like blood and coffee. "I'm not going to fix you," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't be your salvation or your redemption or whatever you're looking for. I'm just me, tired and debt-ridden and trying to figure out how to survive in a city that barely acknowledges I exist. I know, and I'm not going to pretend what you do is okay. The violence, the crime, all of it. I'm going to struggle with it. I'm going to have days where I look at you and see a monster instead of a man." "I know," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. But she took a shaky breath. "I'm also not going to pretend I don't feel something for you. That I haven't been feeling it for weeks. That tonight, when you defended me, when you looked at me like I was precious, I didn't feel alive for the first time since my father died. So, if this is insane, if this is wrong, if this is the worst decision I've ever made," she squeezed his hand, "then I'm making it anyway, because I'm tired of being invisible. And you see me." Jun Ho's control finally shattered completely. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck, and she felt him shaking against her. "Thank you," he breathed against her skin. "Thank you. I'll spend the rest of my life proving you didn't make a mistake. I'll give you everything. I'll keep you safe. I'll make sure you never regret this. Jun Ho." Sarah pulled back enough to cup his face, forcing him to look at her. "You can't promise that. You can't promise I won't regret this, or that I'll always be safe, or that this will work.
All you can promise is that you'll try.
And that you'll be honest with me. No more managing my life from the shadows. No more making decisions for me. We figure this out together, or we don't figure it out at all." He nodded against her hands, and when he kissed her this time, it tasted like salt and coffee, and promises neither of them was sure they could keep. But they'd made their choice. They'd jumped off the cliff together. And if they were falling, at least they weren't falling alone. 3 days later, Sarah stood in the classic American diner for the last time. Mr. Park had signed the papers that morning, shock and greed warring on his face, as Jun Ho's lawyers handed him a check with more zeros than the diner was worth. The new owner, a shell corporation that was really Jun Ho, would be renovating the place, turning it into something else. Something that wouldn't carry the memory of blood on linoleum and the ghost of a lonely waitress serving 2 a.m. coffee. Sarah had come alone, despite Jun Ho's protests. She needed this, needed to say goodbye to the life she'd been living, the invisible existence she'd carved out in Seoul's margins. She walked through the empty diner, trailing her fingers across the cracked vinyl booths, the scratched countertop, the ancient jukebox that Jun Ho had already arranged to have moved to the penthouse. Her uniform was folded neatly on the counter, grease stains and all, a artifact of someone she'd been just 72 hours ago. The bell above the door chimed, and Jun Ho entered, looking out of place in his tailored suit against the diner's retro Americana. He didn't speak, just watched her say her goodbyes to a place that had been both prison and sanctuary. "I worked here for 8 months, Sarah said quietly. "Every shift, I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay off the debts and go home and start over. But somewhere along the way, this became home. This and," she looked at him, "and you." Jun Ho moved closer, his hands sliding into his pockets like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "You can still go home. The debts are paid. I'll set you up with enough money to start over, do whatever you want. You don't have to stay because you feel trapped." "I'm not staying because I feel trapped." Sarah turned to face him fully. "I'm staying because I'm choosing to. There's a difference." "Is there?" His eyes were dark, searching. "Or are you staying because I've left you no other options? Because I'm a monster who manipulated your life and now you feel obligated?" "Stop that." Sarah crossed the distance between them, jabbing a finger into his chest. Stop trying to talk me out of this. Stop trying to give me exits. I'm not a child, Jun Ho. I'm not naive. I know exactly what I'm walking into. I've spent the last 3 days reading everything I can find about your family, your syndicate, your reputation. I know about the territory wars. I know about the bodies. I know about the politicians you own and the businesses you control and the violence that keeps it all running. Then why? Because I'd rather be seen by a monster than invisible to the world. Because you're not just a monster. You're also the man who listened to me talk about my father at 2 a.m. You're the man who tipped in gold because you wanted to help but knew I'd be too proud to accept charity. You're the man who looked at me like I was precious even when you were covered in blood. She grabbed his shirt, pulling him down until they were eye to eye. You're both, Jun Ho. Monster and man. And I'm choosing both. He kissed her like he was trying to memorize the taste of her, his hands finally free from his pockets and tangling in her hair. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to ruin you, he whispered. I'm going to make you complicit in things that will change who you are. I'm going to drag you into darkness and expect you to stand beside me. And I'm not going to feel guilty about it because you're mine and I'm too selfish to let you go. Good, Sarah said. Because I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to call you out when you're being too ruthless. I'm going to make you remember what it feels like to be human. I'm going to be a complication in your perfectly controlled world. And I'm not going to apologize for it because you're mine too, and I'm too stubborn to let you forget that. A smile tugged at his lips, a real one, not the Cold Prince's mask or the Predator's grin. Just Jun Ho, her 2 a.m. regular, looking at her like she'd hung the moon. We're going to be a disaster, he said. Probably. Sarah grinned. But at least we'll be a disaster together. They left the diner hand in hand, and Sarah didn't look back. The black SUV was waiting at the curb, Jun Ho's men standing at attention, and Seoul stretched out before them in all its glittering, dangerous glory. Sarah was trading her invisible life for a visible one, her safety for a different kind of security, her independence for a partnership with a beautiful monster who saw her as salvation. As Jun Ho helped her into the car, his hand lingering on her waist in a gesture that was both protective and possessive, Sarah caught her reflection in the window. She looked different. Not just cleaner or better dressed, but transformed. There was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a confidence that came from being chosen, being seen, being wanted. Ready? Jun Ho asked, sliding in beside her and immediately pulling her close. Sarah thought about her father, about the debts she'd carried, about the invisible life she'd been living. She thought about the violence she'd witnessed, the darkness she was walking into, the danger that would now follow her everywhere. She thought about Jun Ho's arms around her, the way he looked at her like she was everything, the promise of being seen for the rest of her life. Ready, she said, and meant it. The SUV pulled away from the diner, leaving behind pink and blue neon. If you watch till the end, please don't forget to like and subscribe to be the first to get more stories like this. Stories take a lot of time to develop, and that's the only way you can support us. Until next time when we meet again, my romance lovers.